When you strip away the noise, the branding, the spin, what's left is a raw, uncomfortable truth. The media, the system we've trusted to inform us, protect us, reflect us, has been hijacked. Not just by billionaires, or governments, or intelligence agencies, but by a mindset. A mindset that values control over clarity, influence over integrity, and profit over truth. But the story doesn't end there, because even as the system grows more sophisticated, it's more manipulative, more embedded into the machinery of daily life, people are waking up. They're asking questions they were never supposed to ask. They're noticing the gaps, the inconsistencies, the things that don't quite add up, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start to recognize the patterns. You see the repetition of language across supposedly independent outlets. You notice how stories are framed, not to inform, but to trigger. You catch the way narratives are dropped when they no longer serve a purpose. You become aware of how attention is herded, how outrage is curated, how thought is policed. And you begin to realize the most dangerous idea in the world is not a conspiracy theory or a radical manifesto. It's a simple question. Why is this story being told right now? Why are these voices elevated while others are silenced? Why does the media always seem to move in sync with corporate interests, political agendas, and state propaganda? And from that question, everything unravels. Because once people start asking why, they begin looking elsewhere. They start exploring independent media. They begin listening to dissenting voices. They dig into sources, fact-check claims, compare coverage. They begin trusting their instincts again. And the system hates that, because the greatest threat to a controlled narrative is a critically thinking population. That's why we're seeing a rising push to regulate speech online. Why fact-checking is used, not just to correct, but to discredit. Why platforms are cracking down on independent voices. Why governments now openly coordinate with tech companies to suppress what they label as dangerous ideas. But dangerous to whom? Not to the people, to the powerful. Because a free people with free access to truth is harder to govern, harder to manipulate, harder to herd. So the fight for media is really the fight for freedom. Freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of consciousness. And in this fight, technology is both a weapon and a battlefield. On one hand, it enables surveillance, manipulation, and censorship on a scale we've never seen. But on the other, it allows people from around the world to connect, share, and organize outside the approved channels. Podcast, independent documentaries, long-form journalism, citizen reporting. These are the cracks in the system, the leaks in the dam, and they're growing because people are hungry. Not for entertainment, not for distraction, but for truth. Real, raw, unfiltered truth. The kind that doesn't come wrapped in a corporate logo or a partisan spin. That hunger is what gives us hope. It's what's driving the rise of creators, citizen journalists, whistleblowers, and platforms that prioritize transparency over control. But it's not easy. The path to independent media is hard. It lacks funding. It lacks protection. It comes with risk, smears, deplatforming, lawsuits, burnout. And yet, people continue. Because the truth is worth it. And because once you understand the role media plays in shaping the world, you realize it can be used for something better. It doesn't have to be a tool of division, fear, and control. It can be a tool of healing, connection, and empowerment. But only if we change who owns it. Not just legally, but culturally. We must stop giving our attention to systems that manipulate us. We must stop funding media that lies to us. We must stop defending voices that don't defend the truth. We must build something new. A media built on decentralization, transparency, community, integrity, one where funding comes from the people, not the advertisers. Where journalists are protected, not punished. where facts matter more than feelings, where diverse views can exist without censorship, where nuance is respected, where context is king. It won't happen overnight, but it's already happening. Each time someone unsubscribes from a corporate outlet and supports an independent creator, the shift grows. Each time a lie is exposed, a truth gains power. Each time someone questions the official story weakens, and this is where you come in. Because the media isn't just what's produced, it's what's consumed, what's shared, what's believed. You are part of the system, and that means you can change it. You can choose what to watch, who to trust, what to question. You can challenge your assumptions. Step outside your algorithm. Seek out sources that make you uncomfortable. Not because they confirm your beliefs, but because they stretch your understanding. That's where growth happens, and it's through that growth that we take back control, not just of media, but of our minds. Because the final frontier of control isn't external, it's internal. The war is for your attention, for your beliefs, for your sense of reality. But once you realize that, you take the power back, and that's what the system fears most. Not a protest, not a revolution, but a quiet awakening. Millions of people simply turning off the noise, turning toward truth, refusing to be played. Because the truth is, the media doesn't own us. We gave it that power, and we can take it back, starting now. If you think the media is only shaped by corporations, you're only seeing half the picture. Because while billionaires and conglomerates control the surface, what happens behind the scenes is even more disturbing. The truth is, the media is also a tool of the state, a weapon, a battlefield. And the war isn't just over territory or politics. It's over your mind. For decades, intelligence agencies have quietly worked with journalists, editors, and producers, not just to leak information, but to plant it. Not just to shape stories, but to invent them. And most of the time, you never even know it's happening. Back in the 1970s, a program called Operation Mockingbird was exposed in the United States. It revealed how the CIA had placed assets agents posing as journalists inside major newsrooms. They didn't just monitor the media, they helped write it. They influenced what got published, what got covered, what got ignored. The goal wasn't just to spread propaganda abroad, it was to manage public perception at home. And when this was revealed, there was public outrage. But nothing really changed. So the program was renamed, restructured, rebranded. And similar tactics continued through partnerships, through influence, through quiet relationships between media executives and intelligence officials. Not just in the US, but all over the world. Governments learned that if you control the narrative, you don't need to control the people directly. You just need to feed them a story, something to believe in, to fear, to fight. If the public is emotionally hooked, they'll never ask who's holding the fishing line, and that's the genius of psychological operations. They don't force, they guide. They don't block information, they drown it in noise. They don't silence dissent, they stigmatize it. They create confusion so deep that truth becomes subjective. Reality becomes optional, and trust collapses. In recent years, these tactics have gone digital. Governments now use bots, sock puppet accounts, and algorithmic manipulation to shape online conversations. Fake trends, fake outrage, fake consensus. All engineered to influence how you think, what you believe, who you trust, who you hate. It's not science fiction. It's happening now, in real time. And most people don't even realize it. Think about how quickly public opinion can shift overnight. Think about how certain events dominate the headlines, while others vanish. Think about how narratives harden before the facts are even known. That's not journalism. That's narrative warfare. And the lines between media and government have blurred more than ever. Journalists are invited to secret briefings. Outlets receive classified leaks deemed for maximum political effect. Former intelligence officials become cable news analysts. And war is sold not with evidence, but with emotion. It happened in Iraq. It happened in Libya. It happened in Syria. Stories that were later proven false chemical weapons. Weapons of mass destruction, humanitarian excuses were amplified by trusted media outlets, not because they were verified, but because they were useful. Useful to justify action. Useful to rally support. Useful to distract from deeper agendas. And when those stories fell apart, there were no apologies, no retractions. The damage was done. Public opinion had been shaped. Policy had been set. Lives had been lost, and the media moved on. But the pattern never stopped. In every major conflict, you see it. Sensational images, unverified reports, anonymous sources, emotional appeals, dissenters labeled traitors, nuance erased, context removed. The goal isn't to inform. The goal is to win the information war, and the casualties are not just truth and trust, they're people, real people. On the ground, civilians, soldiers, refugees, victims of wars they never voted for. Victims of policies they were never told the full truth about. Because when the media partners with power, it no longer serves the people. It becomes part of the machine, a soft weapon, a psychological scalpel that cuts through fact and implants fear. And it doesn't stop at war. Look at how domestic unrest is covered. Protests are framed based on who's protesting. Police violence is either condemned or excused, depending on the political context. Economic suffering is hidden behind market data. Corruption is turned into a partisan talking point. Every narrative is curated. Every story is packaged. Every word is strategic, and when people notice, when they ask questions, they're labeled conspiracy theorists, misinformation spreaders, extremists, not because they're wrong, but because they're outside the approved window of discourse. That window is called the Overton window. It defines what is politically acceptable to discuss in public. And the media plays a critical role in keeping that window narrow. Anything outside of it is too radical, too dangerous, too fringe. And slowly, the boundaries of thought are fenced in, until everything sounds the same, until everyone argues within the same parameters, until true dissent becomes unthinkable. But who decides what's inside the window? Who decides what is acceptable, what is true, what is safe? It's not you. It's not the public. It's not the journalists. It's the power behind the media, the state, the corporate sponsors, the intelligence operatives, the unelected advisors, the think tanks, the committees, the contractors that decide. And when that power is challenged, the media responds like a defense mechanism. It attacks, it mocks, it isolates, creates fear not of danger, but of social rejection. It trains people to self-censor, to avoid questions, to stay in line. And over time, the result is a society where truth is dangerous, but lies are patriotic, where silence is safety, where apathy is rewarded. And the irony is it works. Because fear works. People fear being wrong. They fear being alone. They fear losing their job, their friends, their platform, so they comply. Silently, reluctantly, hoping someone else will speak up first. But when no one speaks, the machine rolls on, confident, ruthless, unchecked, and the media remains its voice. This is why truth is not just a casualty, it's the enemy. Real truth threatens power. Real truth exposes lies. Real truth demands accountability. And that's why it must be buried. Under headlines, under entertainment, under constant stimulation. Because if people ever saw clear relief, they ever realized how deeply manipulated they've been, everything would change, and those in power know it. So they build bigger distractions, louder conflicts, more manufactured. Once you understand that control of the media isn't just about content, but about ownership, everything starts to make sense. It's not a coincidence. It's not a glitch. It's a structure. And the deeper you look into that structure, the clearer the pattern becomes. Let's look at the media empires themselves. Companies like Comcast, Disney, Warner Brothers, Discovery, Paramount Global, and Fox Corporation. These are not media companies in the traditional sense. They are conglomerates, megacorporations with interests in theme parks, telecom, publishing, cable, satellite, streaming, lobbying, even weapons manufacturing in some cases. Their portfolios stretch across borders, markets, and platforms. And at the top of each of these empires are a handful of people, board members, shareholders, executives whose decisions ripple across the world without ever being voted on by the public. Take Comcast. It owns NBC, MSNBC, CNBC, Universal Pictures, and Sky. It also controls massive broadband networks. That means it controls not just what you watch, but how you watch it. What gets prioritized? What gets throttled? What gets packaged into your bill? Comcast has a vested interest in maintaining control over both infrastructure and narrative. It's not just selling content. It's selling the environment that shapes the content. Disney, on the other hand, is often seen as just an entertainment company. But it owns ABC News, ESPN, FX, National Geographic, and the entire Disney Plus empire. While it projects a family-friendly brand, it's also one of the most powerful forces in cultural messaging. When Disney takes a political stance or avoids one, it's not neutral. It's calculated. It's strategic. And it's always about protecting the brand because the brand is the source of its power. Warner Brothers Discovery controls CNN, HBO, DC Comics, and massive portions of digital media. Paramount Global owns CBS, MTV, Showtime, and streaming platforms like Pluto TV. Fox Corporation owns Fox News, Fox Business, and a vast network of local stations. These companies compete on the surface, but behind the scenes, their interests often align. They share the same advertisers, the same regulators, the same market pressures, and in many cases, the same investors. And that's where the real control begins. Because behind the scenes of these mega media houses are investment giants, firms like Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. These asset management behemoths hold major stakes in nearly every large media company. They also hold stakes in the companies those media outlets report on: oil, pharma, defense, tech, banks. The lines blur. Vanguard owns parts of CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC. So when those outlets appear to disagree, who really wins? Vanguard does. Because the conflict keeps you watching, the outrage keeps you engaged, and your engagement is monetized. That's not news. That's business. And BlackRock, it doesn't just own media, it owns the narrative. It has stakes in nearly every sector: housing, energy, agriculture, defense. It consults with governments. It shapes economic policy. It's been called the fourth branch of government. So when a media outlet with BlackRock funding reports on the economy, what perspective are you getting? And what perspectives are being left out? This kind of ownership doesn't always dictate content line by line. It doesn't have to. The control is structural. It's about incentives. If a media company knows that a certain story could upset its largest shareholders, it may simply avoid it. If a producer knows that pushing a controversial guest could cost them access to powerful figures, they won't book them. If an anchor knows that deviating from the script could cost them their career, they won't deviate. And this culture of silent compliance trickles down. It affects what interns learn, what editors greenlight, What stories make it to the front page? Not through force, through fear. Fear of losing funding. Fear of being labeled. Fear of losing access. The fear that if you challenge the system will erase you. That's why certain issues are covered relentlessly, while others are ignored. It's why wars are framed through a certain lens. Why economic downturns are blamed on small factors, never on systemic design. Why pharmaceutical scandals are underplayed, surveillance programs are justified. The media doesn't lie all the time, it simply tells you a very selective version of the truth. And once people start to sense this, their trust erodes. And that's exactly what's happening now. Trust in mainstream media is at historic lows. More people than ever believe the media is biased, bought, or broken. But instead of fixing the system, the media doubles down. It attacks independent voices, labels dissent as misinformation. It tries to win back trust, not through transparency, but through censorship, because they're afraid. Not of losing ratings, but of losing control. For decades, the media controlled the conversation. It told us what to care about, what to fear, who to blame. But now, for the first time, that control is slipping. The internet opened a door they never meant to open, and people walked through it. But even online, control follows. The same firms that own mainstream media also invest in tech platforms. They shape algorithms. They advise policy. They fund fact-checking organizations. So while the surface looks different, the architecture often remains the same. Independent creators are demonetized. Algorithms hide alternative views. Platforms rewrite terms of service. And always in the name of safety. But safety for who? Because the truth is, the most dangerous ideas are often the ones that threaten power. Not with violence, but with clarity, with honesty, with inconvenient facts. And the more those facts spread, the more desperate the system becomes to contain them. So it builds a new narrative that alternative voices are dangerous. That media must be centralized. That control is necessary. And people, exhausted by confusion and chaos, sometimes agree. But that agreement comes at a price. The price is truth. The price is autonomy. The price is freedom. You can see it in countries around the world. Governments partnering with media to combat disinformation. Social platforms being pressured to remove content that challenges official stories. Journalists being arrested. Whistleblowers being punished. The pattern is global. And it's accelerating because in a world where truth is dangerous, lies become law. And the media becomes not a mirror, but a mask. A mask that hides corruption, that protects empires. That sells wars, that glorifies billionaires, that distracts the public with trivia while the world burns in the background. And beneath that mask is a business model that doesn't work without your attention. That's the final piece. The media may be owned by the powerful, but it's fueled by us, every click, every share, every view. We feed the system, even when we hate it. Because outrage is most people think they're free because they can choose what channel to watch, what newspaper to read, what app to scroll through. They believe that information is everywhere, and that freedom of speech means freedom of thought. But what if that freedom is only an illusion? What if all the different voices we think we're hearing are actually coming from the same few mouths? And what if the media, the thing we trust to inform, to educate, to tell the truth, was never designed for that purpose in the first place? In the modern world, media surrounds us like air. Headlines, social media posts, breaking alerts, expert panels, it never stops. From the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep, we're immersed in information. But very few people stop to ask the one question that changes everything. Who decides what we see? Who decides what gets reported, what gets buried, and what gets spun into 1,000 narratives. The idea of a free press is something we're taught to take for granted. We assume that journalists investigate powerful people, that the media keeps governments and corporations in check. That truth rises through the noise if you just listen long enough. But the truth is far more uncomfortable. Because when you follow the money, when you trace the lines of ownership, when you look at who actually controls the platforms, the networks, the voices, you find a very different story in the United States alone. Over 90% of all media is owned by just 6 corporations. 6, not hundreds, not thousands. 6 parent companies own the majority of everything we read, watch, and hear. That means 6 CEOs, 6 boards of directors, 6 agendas, and beneath them, hundreds of seemingly independent outlets, anchors, blogs, and pages, all dancing to the same rhythm, all feeding from the same trough, all competing for our attention while whispering the same core messages. It didn't used to be this way. Once upon a time, local newspapers were owned by local families. Radio stations had independent managers. TV stations operated with a sense of civic duty. But over the decades, something shifted. Media became business. Business became power. And power, as it always does, began to consolidate. Mergers, acquisitions, buyouts said happened slowly at first, then faster. Until the landscape was no longer made of voices, but of echoes. And yet, we didn't notice. We kept watching, we kept reading, we kept scrolling, because the illusion of choice is powerful. One station leans left, one leans right, one feels independent, one feels elite, one is rebellious, one is traditional. But when you look closely, you begin to see the patterns. The coordinated narratives, to synchronized language, the topics that get coverage everywhere, and the ones that never make it past a whisper. When something important happens really important, watch how the headlines align. Watch how the guests on different shows repeat the same phrases. Watch how opinion pieces echo one another across outlets that are supposedly rivals. This isn't coincidence. This is choreography. And the choreographers are not journalists. They're executives, lobbyists, shareholders, political strategists, and sometimes even intelligence agencies. You see, media is not just about telling stories. It's about shaping reality. It's about setting the boundaries of acceptable thought. About deciding what is news and what is conspiracy. What is serious and what is dangerous. And once those boundaries are drawn, most people never cross them. Because to question the media is to question the lens through which you see the world. And if the lens is broken, how do you know what's real? That's the secret. Control the lens, and you don't need to control the people. They'll control themselves. They'll argue over the headlines, choose sides, pick teams, rage against each other, never realizing they're all playing a game whose rules they didn't write, whose board they didn't design, and whose outcome was decided before they even sat down. Look at how quickly stories rise and fall. A scandal dominates headlines for a week, then disappears. A war breaks out, and we're told who the villain is before we understand the conflict. A politician says something, and the spin machine activates before the words are even finished. This isn't news. This is narrative management. This is perception warfare. And the goal isn't to inform you, it's to steer you. Because when the same corporations that own the news also own defense contractors, oil companies, pharmaceutical giants, and lobbying firms, do you really think you're getting unbiased information? When media outlets rely on advertising from the very industries they're supposed to hold accountable, do you think they bite the hand that feeds them? When billionaire owners have personal relationships with politicians, do you think their papers publish unfiltered truth? And it's not just what they say, it's what they don't say. The stories that vanish. The voices that are silenced. The questions that are never asked. Media isn't just biased, it's blind, by design. It shines a spotlight on what it's told to, and it leaves the rest in darkness. Sometimes the control is subtle. A newsroom is told to tone down a segment. A producer is pressured to balance a story by inviting a voice that makes it safer. An anchor avoids certain topics because they know it'll cause trouble. And sometimes the control is blunt. Stories are killed. Whistleblowers are smeared. Journalists are fired. It doesn't happen every day. It doesn't have to. The message is clear. Stay in line or disappear. And that message echoes around the world, not just in authoritarian states where media is openly controlled, but in so-called democracies where control hides behind contracts, incentives, access, and fear. Even in free societies, the press is increasingly owned by the powerful, aligned with corporate interests, and used to manufacture consent. Consent for what? For wars, for surveillance, for economic policies that benefit the elite, for political movements that maintain the status quo, for the illusion that things are getting better even as more and more people fall behind. And now, with social media, the control is even more invisible. Algorithms decide what you see, not based on truth, not based on importance, but based on what keeps you scrolling, what keeps you angry, what keeps you divided. And while we argue in comment sections, the architects of the system continue shaping the world. The platforms that promise to democratize information have become new gatekeepers. Censorship isn't just top-down anymore. It's coded into the feed. Posts are buried. Videos are demonetized. Accounts are shadow banned. Not for lying, but for questioning, for thinking, for seeing through the fog. And most people don't even notice, because they're too busy reacting to headlines, to trending topics, to manufactured outrage. The cycle moves too fast. And while we chase the next story, we forget to ask, who wrote the last one? That's the real danger. Not fake news, but controlled news. Not chaos, but order, and order imposed by people you never elected, never see, and never question. An order designed to keep you distracted, compliant, and afraid. Afraid of the other side. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of stepping outside the narrative, because outside the narrative is uncertainty. And inside the narrative, at least, things make sense. But that sense is artificial. A script, a story, a lie. And the deeper you go,